Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have a few questions. Very strangely, but not too strangely, I think, two people came up with basically the same question. One was Doris Flooding from Toronto, talking about heart center opening. Excuse me. And Carol Martin basically talking about roughly the same thing. So we'll give it a shot and see how this one works. Doris says, you previously stated that we are preparing ourselves for heart center opening and that the heart center is hard to engage. Can you please expand and discuss this in more depth? How can our perception of loving relate to the heart center opening, or does it loving on a human plane? Sort of feels good. Okay, and that's part of Doris's question. And here's Carol's. Here's a query about the heart center. About a month ago, you seemed to say that the lower heart can have emotion in connection with the solar plexus. Did I get that right? Yeah, you did. Also, heard you say the upper chest has emotion, can have emotion. Is that more connected to the throat? It can be. I sometimes feel the upper chest when I'm touched by something or someone. Let me try to talk about this a little bit. This is a little bit complicated because traditionally people talk about these centers as coming together in the Hindu practice, coming together, and they call that Kundalini. That just means energy coming together from the root center right to the top. And you can feel that blend moving upward or downward, by the way. However, mainly it's talked about from the root center to the top of the head. The dilemma with this statement is that the personality is virtually touched by more energy as that particular kind of link begins to occur. There's all kinds of attitudes around it, meaning that link means that the individual is more superior to others who don't have that link, that kind of thing. It's basic personality stuff that isn't what it's meant to be. And it's often misunderstood by those who live in India, for example. But others who live in India don't see it that way. When I say live in India, I'm talking about live within that construct of having their system opened. What happens is this. First of all, the root gonad and solar plexus are the centers that influence strongly the personality. Now, it's often called the lower triad by many, and it's often called often just an affiliation with the personality's way of engaging. No matter how it engages, doesn't make any difference. Because of so much misunderstanding about this principle, about this higher state or divine principle. And so much is left out that we, on this level, end up making statements about what it must be like to be engaged at a higher level. So that's number one. But what happens when this energy is linked to the top of the head is you are affected as a personality, because that's what your personality is, an engagement with root energy, gonad energy, emotional energy, and also it moves up, can be the heart can be partly open, the throat can be, the brow can be, the crown can be. But a real link right up to the top of the head increases the flow into what the energy that is already in you does. So you become, if you're a little bit self focused, all of us are in this plane. You can strike out anything that says you're not, because you are. And that's the way we engage with life and tend to survive. There's no negation in that. But in the speaking about it, we flower how things are and could be, or how we are when we're engaging with people, how we are when we're alone, how we're engaged with family backgrounds, emotional backgrounds of all kinds, mental backgrounds, for example, as well. We have not reached the apex of our mind, our emotions, and our physical capacities. All right. Still talking about the heart center. So what happens with these levels of flow that move from any of these lower centers is that it engages with centers above the diaphragm. They then, as they grow, engage with centers below the diaphragm. And the reason why it's talked about like that is because the personality is affiliated so strongly in our world with the root gonad and solar plexus chakras, or zephira, valves, if you want, that energy comes in and opens them differently as we grow. It affects us differently. Because whether you believe it or not, we're not only involved with this one lifetime. Well, for those of you who don't necessarily agree with that statement, you could say you're a complex person and there's many things that you do not understand about how you function in the world. If your focus is on defending you in relationship to that, because somehow you have an image structure in there, you'll find that you might overemphasize your abilities because you're defending how you think you need to be as a personality. Still personality levels. Meaning, the root center can have personality levels engaged with it. The gonad center, the same thing. Solar plexus, the same thing. Heart center, the same thing. And it's got another little center in there, in between the heart and the solar plexus. Same thing. Throat center, same thing. Brow center, same thing. Crown center, same thing. What does that come out to? It means something like this. Even if you have a link from the root to the top of the head, you are very still involved with views about the value of you. In our world, you're not going to get away from them unless it is helpful somewhere along the line to some not to have that. And then if you can handle energy coming in without it affecting your personality in some kind of extreme manner, so you can't handle it, then energy can come in to help that other person. That's not where we are. Energy can come in and help another person, but also when it comes in, it stretches you. And in that stretch, you get to be aware better your version of you. Okay, what about the heart center then, Ron? Because that's the blooming question. You're absolutely right. The heart center is interesting. When it links with that root gonad and solar plexus, you can be affected in a soft way inside. You, out of nowhere, even if you're not a person that is normally affected by anything or very much, you can be affected by it, and you can have tears rolling down your eyes, and suddenly you understand why this is happening, or you may not. Your understanding will follow the bias of what's already in your personality. That's the dilemma. We battle to maintain that bias. The heart center will often be, when it's open, because the solar plexus is open. We don't make the link. And at our stages, often it's not important that we do. But in perceiving better, we begin to slowly become more subtly aware, or you can say, solar plexus is open, and oh, I can feel movement up into the chest, but it's still related to my personality, but I'm feeling softer, and things may touch me harder than I want them to. And I don't quite understand why that might be, because I'm normally not like that, you could say. Now, once the heart center affects another part of its engagement as an overall center, it has many parts. Then suddenly, the throat and the heart center start linking together a little bit, and this means that your gonad center and your throat and root center has entered an engagement, joining somehow with the throat. And it's shifting a little bit your focus on yourself to a focus on energy and how it's affecting you also, but how others might affect you, but how you affect others. And ultimately how you affect the whole of humanity. That's a little bit farther down the line. And you have to be careful with this, because you'll naturally, from time to time, think you're enabling humanity to be this way or that way. And in fact, there are so many affecting humanity, because humanity right now is 8 billion people. And how many billions of people have gone on before? Think about that. And there's levels and waves of engagement of frequency that relate to all of humanity. It's a big deal. But let's get back to the heart center. The heart center itself is quite fascinating. When it links with that throat center, even after it's gone in from the solar plexus, root, and gonad center, and it links in there, you'll feel like a little bit of a movement across the upper part of the chest, and it'll link into that throat center and begin to link slowly with the brow center. These two attempt to be together. And they do it. This is for good reason. Now, all of this awareness normally comes after, in some lifetime, there's a link between the root and the top of the head. It can be like a thread, just a little thread. Bingo, bingo, but doesn't matter how big it is at all. But that link is there. And slowly it begins to manifests a little bit. And there's a dilemma. Automatically, the personality grabs onto it because in our world right today, you, me, everybody else, we are engaging with life as we touch it, as it touches us. And how we engage with others is magnified as that energy increases. In a subtle manner, fortunately for us, and it may feel like it's a huge tank, but it's subtle. The more you engage with it in a gentle manner, the more it gentles down, tends to gentle down. But it has tremendous ability, even in the subtlest form, to touch you in ways that will help you to grow. And we do not understand fully those subtle ways. But we can make up rules and regulations about it because that's what we do on these levels about those levels. Not a negative thing. It's what we do to help ourselves understand better. And then later on, we can change those levels, those rules, so-called, because they may be different than what we believe. The same has happened in science. Rules have been changed all the way along the line for thousands of years, fortunately. And in our future, they will change again. Not to say that ours are not very interesting right now and very valuable, because they are. They are. But as we know more, things change. We begin to understand differently, come up with different ideas. This has happened. In some areas, especially the scientific areas, one could say, for thousands of years. From the Greeks and prior to the Greeks, Babylonians, prior to that, perhaps in China. And even though we don't like the sounds of those things, things developed quite early in other areas other than in the West. It doesn't matter that that's the way it was. What matters is, as a whole group in humanity, we are changing. And the change is not easy. As that heart center opens, for example, there is one thing that I've warned people about for years. And here's this really crazy thing. Initially, in the heart center, there's a caring that develops, and it's almost like an empathy that develops. And personality gets hold of that one and then makes up all kinds of rules around its own personal bias. 15 people can have that kind of thing happening, and they come up with different ideas about whoever else might be around. The bias is the thing that needs help. The bias is the thing that no one wants to get help for, because protection of the bias keeps the previous personality styles in vogue. And that is what we do. It's not a bad thing, good thing. It's what we do. So as that heart center starts to come on, suddenly you're noting that you're not engaging the same way with the emotion as you were before. This is very, very devastating. It has been devastating, especially in the 70s when there was a big change, just a big jump in energy shifting. All kinds of people left meditation. All kinds of people got back into making money, had families. And this was what needed to be done. Because Energy was getting a little bit too strong for them to handle outside the personality. What I mean by that is it was too close to having different states engage with it and use that personality for a purpose related to higher states. We weren't ready for that. I'm not sure when we'll ever be ready for that. However, what happened was people left their partners because they no longer had the sense that they had when they were 18 and 19, and they called that kind of loving was not there. It had disappeared. So they went out, searched for other partners where they could recapture being 16, 18, 20 again. It's a totally different kind of thing. It was because of the linking of the upper part of the upper part of the heart center. And it was beginning to open, and the throat center. It had a tremendous impact on the gonad center and the root centers. Opened a little bit more. What does it do? It shoves energy down to where energy was coming from, the lower centers. Natural, normal thing to have happen. Nobody understood that that's what was going on. And it wasn't written down anywhere. And this is difficult to write down because you have the views of everyone who believes they understand how spiritual growth works, and they would selectively engage with that material and call it wrong because it didn't comply with other material. It's what we do. Same happened in science. Same happened anywhere. It's what we do. We don't understand something, therefore it can't be right. Fair enough? We don't understand why this happens and why that happens. So it can't be the right thing, a good thing. We don't understand. So therefore we protect what's already there. In our personalities, it's the same thing. So interestingly enough, though, if you can remember that that's going on, or try to understand that it's going on, or try to perceive it's going on, then do something that would help you to open more your relationship with understanding and being kind and being more gentle. This is really not so simple. One thing you can do if this happens is you can start doing the balancing roughly about the ear level. Get that heart and throat structure to work softly with the root gonad and solar plexus. Because there's a fundamental reflex in all of us to survive the way we have been. And anything that moves that out of whack a little bit, in other words, anything that's new coming in, or broader, more enabling, makes anybody nervous. This is the nature of growing. And it also increases what you normally do, but only for the purpose of taking a look to see. That's why it is important for that heart center to come on, because it begins to help you to see better. It affects the throat center affects the brow center. Then it also affects the emotional center, and the willfulness of that personality is trying to get used to the fact that you're backing off a lot more than you ever did before. And that means that there's change there. Sometimes you become more territorial. Sometimes you become reflexively responsive to something and you don't understand why. Because you never had been before. That's not a negation in any way. That's a broadening of how the energy is coming in. And slowly, and I effectively have to emphasize this, slowly we grow through that and begin to find that we contract or engage with some of the older ways of softening ourselves down if you had them. And if you didn't, it's harder because you're cultivating new ways of engaging with life, and it makes you feel vulnerable because you're not so sure they're going to work at all. And so you need evidence, and evidence does not come quickly. So you end up cultivating a reference point that relates to yourself, and that can be very helpful no matter what. Anything, whatever is going on around you, you try to do the best you can within you. That comes in real handy later on as you move into an engagement with different level of higher states, where you're watching that energy occur all the time, and you get through the business of saying, now what do I do with it? And why do I do it? And why is it coming in? And what? And you get through that. And then you realize it's just there. And you're used to it 24/7, little at a time, more and more. Because you know, because you've watched it. It operates through you for a purpose that will be helpful, perhaps, to others in their particular growing process. This is an idea that was vaguely talked about by some in very flowery language, especially in the Upanishads, implied by others, Sri Aurobindo for sure, many who experienced it but couldn't really openly talk about it because it was not timely. As soon as people begin to have energy moving in them, they want to, like a personality would normally do, cultivate the ability to transmit it to somebody, and I help that person now. Sorry, that's personality stuff. That's personality growing into a place where it can begin to understand you don't have to do that. But our personality structures, before it hits that opening of that link, the link that is beyond the linking or the union of all of those centers, there is another link that links differently. And it links these centers for the purpose of higher states. This is very difficult. Hardly anybody would like to hear something like that. What do you mean, Ron? It's just going to use me? No, you're going to live your life and do whatever, wherever you go and whatever you do. That's what you're going to do. And in the meantime, if there is someone who needs a little bit of help in a place that you cannot perceive, because you can't perceive it, you can be biased about it, jump to conclusions, have all kinds of opinions. We all can. That's not the same thing. You really don't know where a person needs help. That's honest. If you're not honest with yourself, you'll think that you know where. Now, let me change that. If you're a normal human being, you will naturally think you know where. It's because that's the way we are. Just being honest. If you can allow yourself to get beyond that concept, I think you would be rare. It doesn't mean you can't get beyond that, but it takes time to allow it to be okay with us that that can happen, I mean. And when it does happen, to be okay with it, then keep it to yourself. That's a good thing. Why? Because it keeps you humble. Open your mouth to talk about stuff like that, unless you're in a teaching mode. Even then, there are different ways to express things that are non-personal, because eventually that's what it is. So that heart center becomes really important. Here's the reason why. Ultimately, it continues to open and link up with both lower and upper centers. The crown center itself links up with that heart center eventually, because we can't handle that center opening up completely. We would see everything that lies within us. And we would, initial stages, think that everybody else could see it too, because that's how we operate. It would not be true. It doesn't matter. That's how we would react. So you can see how complicated this organism is that we call us, and how interesting and fantastically, wow, wonderful and precious all human beings are. And I emphasize all, no restrictions whatsoever. This is meaningful when I say that, because all levels of help are needed. From the coarsest right through to the highest, whatever that would be. We all need help here. So in a kind of a way, I'm going to look to see if I left anything out. In a kind of way, I'm answering Carol's question along with Doris's question, at least as far as it goes. And okay, let me see. Oh, by the way, the front and the back are affected. Some people have opened in the front, and I think it's the easiest place to open. The dilemma is that once it opens there, without being aware of behind you, then it tends to remain opening there because you have the sense of it, the energy being with you, and you don't try and get it to be all around you. It's just a little trick that you can use to be aware above your head and behind you. You remember that one? Or doing the pump will help a lot to have it in both areas, front and back. Remember, I would agree with the some versions of the Taoist or Chinese orientation that where sometimes the energy will move forward and down and around and come up the back, pulling your neck up. And sometimes it will move up the front, around the back, pulling your head back and down and around and up the front. Both of those things are real as far as some of us have experienced. So the pump can be very helpful there. But if you can remind yourself to be exceedingly gentle because that energy comes in with respect to how you are intense. And if you're learning how to be gentling down, it will come in a subtle manner and be really effectively helpful. Uh, it's not going to obliterate strong reactions, but it will have an effect on them. It will gentle them down to some degree. There's no perfection in these things because we are not perfect, but we are attempting to become aware of that higher state flow that's at least close to the body, sometimes even close to the emotional system, not always as highly oriented in the emotional system as it can get, and sometimes mentally affected, but not always as highly effective as it can be. You can turn some parts of the brain on that have not been turned on before. But that's something you would have to handle. It turns down on the lower centers with the higher centers in ways that they have not been on before. Then you have to be willing to allow yourself to slow things down a little bit, to be gentle with yourself and others best you can. It's almost like you have to keep reminding yourself. That is, if you are growing at a very quick speed. Normal folk grow, and as they grow, they have time to gentle things down. And it isn't an easy task because we're used to engaging the way we have been trained to do so, and the way we have taken that on for the purpose of being okay with ourselves. No negativity attached to that, but continuance, not giving up, keep going. When you go to meditate, gentle yourself down, soft as you can. And when you're as gentle as you can, kind of ask that you could be gentle just a little bit more. Attempt to try and remember to do that. It's not easy to do, but it is, you will find, interesting because you'll notice some things slightly different. And that's fine. Just notice them. Be okay with them. Continue on. 1 or 2 or 10 doesn't make it happen all the time. Repetition and habit, and it's okay. You're fine. Continue. I remember a story from an old ashram years ago, where if you went to the head yogi and told him something about a story, the first couple of times it would be fine. And he would say, do you want to leave the ashram? You say, well, what do you mean? Your stories are just what thousands of other people have had happen. Why are you so smitten by it? Are you in love with yourself again? Of course, you can't do that in the West because you wouldn't be helpful to anybody. We don't think like that. But then they would fall on their knees and want that person to, remain in the ashram and all the rest of the stuff. But it was a ploy to help them understand that everybody goes through these experiences and they're really okay. But it doesn't signal that you're better or worse than anybody else. It signals, oh, something is happening. Okay. And then if you don't get them, then your first thing you're going to say as a personality, oh, nothing's happening. It can't be really good. Something must be wrong. What did I do bad? Not how that works at all. But that's how our kind of Western personalities work. It's interesting, this whole business of opening. Heart center is pivotal. It links the root gonad solar plexus. It links aspects of the throat, brow, crown centers, and heart, linking them. And then it links with itself in relationship to the whole form, to the top, right to the bottom, glowing for only one purpose. And that purpose is related directly to higher states. And then it doesn't bother you that you're working for higher states and that's it, because you're right in there at that level. Now, the tricky part about that in saying that is some people will think they're right there. And it's not real. We're just growing. And it's how it is. It has to be physical, emotional, and mental. All three parts. And that heart center can be engaging physically, emotionally, and mentally. The same as every other center you have can be a part of exactly the same thing in relationship to higher states. So the root center at a higher state is engaged with awareness only of higher states. If it's needed here, it will be right here because it's engaged with that higher state. You have given a link right to the root, to the physical plane. Same is true of the gonad center, emotional centers, all centers. This is difficult because it's never clarified very much. It's often used as a theoretical orientation, and this is not theory. This is experiential and over long periods of time. Otherwise, we can't handle it. Thank you very much, Carol, for this question. I'm not quite finished with it because there's part A, part B, part C, all the rest of that. And as Doris says, we are preparing ourselves for the heart center opening, and that heart center is hard to engage. It's hard to engage with as its ultimate orientation. That small center in between the solar plexus and the heart center is there to help be almost like a governor. It sweeps around the back, around the rib cage, and up, right between around the spine, into the area behind the heart area. And it's desperately tries to help you from going into perceiving everything about you before you're ready to do that. Now, this is along the line. This is not something that we're aiming for. This is something that happens based on, and ever so slowly, based on what you can handle, so that the handling part is so that that higher state can come in and move you in directions to be helpful in certain frequencies with others who need to engage with those frequencies and with a certain kind of gentle engagement or an engagement relative to the perception of higher states. Oh my, this is, as you can see, it gets a little bit confusing. And I don't blame anybody if it's confusing. Sometimes it can be confusing to anybody. And how does our perception of loving relate to the heart center opening, or does it? Loving on a human plane feels good. That's the emotional structure that opens that first level. And there's a sense of engagement with root center, gonad center. In other words, position and place in your environment. And it aligns with biases that you have had all during your lifetime. Sensations that may be brought up for you, and you bring them up because they feel right for you. And that bias can be mental, or it's often emotionally mental biases, and they play through because it justifies the value of how you function on these planes. There's a tremendous amount of validation that goes on. It's understandable. It's how we make our way through life. What about this idea? No, this idea. Well, I think I'm going to do this. Okay, all right. Okay, that feels right. You hear that all the time. It's the thing that you do that engages and relates to the bias of those three lower centers. And how they make sense in this brain and nervous system that we have. And this is just exactly how we are and how we grow through that. Okay. Loving on a human plane feels good, and it does. It's allowed. Feeling good is allowed. Recognizing, from one point of view, that how you feel good or what makes you feel good changes because your personality will get a little bit, wants something else, wants something more. Feeling good is not enough. It changes. Why? Because the personality is set up to do that. It's set up to grow. And unfortunately, as I was saying about the 70s, all kinds of people, because they were growing too quickly, some of them, they were afraid they were losing something. When suddenly they grew into that throat heart area just ever so slightly, it impacted on the root gonad solar plexus area, the importance and value of the personality. And what began to happen was they were discontent. They didn't know they were discontent, in a discontent mode of themselves, with themselves. It was all about everybody else. So the person that they cared for the most, they were the most discontent with, because they cared for them the most. So they were being discontent with the love they had with themselves. So there was all kinds of separations. And then grabbing on to new partners that made them feel like 16 again. In other words, they were moving back into the old method of engaging as a personality, a younger personality would, and that made them feel good. And they were happy to get there because the pressure was off. The pressure was off. It slowed down the growing because it couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle perceiving something, not as something negative, but something, this is different. And continuing to care for their partner. They couldn't do that. Now, in some cases, they grew out of their partner's existence or the way they thought things were. In other words, what they meant was they no longer were enamored with the way they were personally acting with respect to their previous partner. And they didn't want to act in a negative way anymore. So they found somebody else so they could act in a positive way with. My gosh. Think about that. That does not necessarily mean that the personality grew a lot. It means the personality maybe didn't understand something, or maybe it began to understand something better. They might have seen something within themselves. In other words, they had misunderstood what loving was and tried to find it again in a different way. I like the constructive part of that, but I know the other part is there too. Okay. Now she asks another question, which is, this is Doris. If you feel the heart area front and back pressure and not related to needing to see a doctor, is this all related to the heart center? I think it's related to links between the lower centers and the heart center. But on not seeing the doctor, look, I've always said this, and I think that it's really important. Personally, if you have any kind of sense that you are in trouble, heavy chested, sense of something is desperately wrong, see a doctor. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with them or not, see one anyway. They'll put you through some tests. Sometimes those tests will show something up that might be helpful to you. Otherwise, at least you will know nothing happened on the tests. Do that because it's important to you. Just a view. It's my view. When we redirect and move energy through our solar plexus to the back, then forward through the heart, the upper part of the heart, then back and forward through the brow, does that affect the heart center? Yeah, it does. It also strangely affects the brow. Look, if your brow is affected at all, whatever it is linked up to, and normally it's linked up to root gonad solar plexus in a normal personality. And if you remember, there's always a slight link up with the throat. So the throat will be affected. If the throat is affected, the heart center will be affected by the throat and the link in the front from the lower centers. It will then affect the heart center. Keeping in mind that the thing that we call our personalities is a mixture of energy that's physical, emotional, and relatively mental. And it's like just a whole grouping of energies that lie around us, link to us and our actions and behaviors and responses, inside as well as out. So you can't fool it. You can't fool those higher states. It knows exactly how you are. You can think you're going to outwit people, and you can. But what's your point? The point then would be to maintain a personality the way it thinks it needs to be maintained, to be of value to itself. It tends to be how it works. It's not a put down to personalities. There are many personality styles. And we have many goals in our lives. This is one of them. Other goals are related to almost anything else you can come up with. Financial, sports, activities of all kinds. It's what we do. And we do that simply to make some sense of life, from our perspective, whatever that perspective is. But it will continue to do so. The heart center is a wonderful center. It's often not considered pivotal by some because ultimately it affects the nature of how we see our participation on these planes. And this is very, makes us very vulnerable. If you really take in the idea that ultimately, as you are truly growing, the energy itself that makes you up internally is an aspect of higher states. It has a tremendous level of love in it. It will help you to do anything you want to do. That's pretty disheartening from some people's point of view. But it will, and it will also help you to see that maybe this may not be the right way to go for you, or it shows you where it is. It might be the right way to go for you. I can't really say that I would totally understand everything about that movement, any movement in a direction that may not be clear to any of us. Sometimes it seems to be clear, other times, no idea. Don't be afraid to tell yourself that. At least you're being honest with yourself. And in doing that, the link between a higher state can still get stronger. Being honest with yourself. This is very hard to do because we have so many biases. And we defend so heartily and deeply internally and externally what we think must be of great value. We have to do it that way because it stabilizes our relationship, the one that we think we have in life, wherever we are engaging with it. And that is important because we grow through us, not only from us, but through us, by beginning to understand us. And that helps us to understand others quite differently than all people like this are like that, all people like this are like that. But we have to go through these stages of understanding because it helps us to move slightly past it all the time, whatever it might be. It includes spiritual growth. It includes all kinds of interaction with inner development or external development. Science will be the same thing. We have to step beyond what we know now. And we have to step beyond what we understand and experience now as a possibility into a future world which will be different than what it is now. I smile every time I think of artificial intelligence and where it's going and what it's been going. And then I sometimes would almost cry because of it. It can be used by anything for any purpose. This is the dilemma of humanity. Not only in AI, but anything else we might be able to develop into. And we must allow ourselves to begin to understand beyond the bias we have now. Otherwise, our growing will not help humanity very well. But keeping an eye on a positive ball instead of not so positive, do the best you can. Every time you get the opportunity that allows you to recognize that it might be a good thing to do this for society. I wish everyone a very, very enjoyable evening. We're going to meditate now for about an hour, and I will just turn off the visual part and find some sound, some music for us. Good night, everybody. Now we'll just begin to do the balancing and grounding on your own. And have a good evening. Good night, everybody.